Order, order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Wales, Tanmanjeet Singh, Dhesi.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 1, 4 and 5 together. The Government recognises fully the challenges that have been posed by cost of living pressures as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and that is why the UK Government has provided £96 billion since 2022 to support households and individuals across the UK, an average of around £3,400 per household.
Dhesi.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. Like for my Slough constituents, the cost of living crisis in Wales demands urgent action for the good people of Wales, especially as households face being £870 worse off under this government's tax plan. Shockingly, a Which survey has found that 1 in 5 working-age parents in Wales are skipping meals due to the high food prices. So what recent conversations has the Minister had with supermarkets about keeping the cost of food down?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the honourable gentleman will recognise and support the fact that inflation has fallen as a result of the policies being pursued by this government from over 11% to around 4%. I hope he'll agree that workers across Wales will be very pleased with the cut in national insurance contributions, which will mean on average being £642 better off. And if he's really concerned, Mr. Speaker, about the plight of working parents in Wales, I hope he'll ask his colleagues in the Welsh Labour Government to roll out the childcare initiatives that are being rolled out in England but are not being rolled out by the Welsh Labour Government in Wales.
Bentley.
Mr. Speaker, a number of constituents of mine have been adversely affected by their transfer from working tax credit to universal credit due to the fact they work in sectors such as agriculture and tourism, and therefore their income is seasonal in nature. The switch from an annual to a monthly assessment of their entitlement has meant that many are losing out, and the government stated that there will be no impact assessment to determine the financial impact of moving to a monthly assessment. Would the Secretary of State intervene in support of such an assessment so that workers receiving seasonal incomes are treated fairly?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is, it's true, a champion of constituents in rural areas like his own, and I'm perfectly happy to look at any of the information that he wants to give. But I hope he will recognise that the increase in the living wage will have helped constituents, even those who are working seasonally, alongside the extra payments that have been made by this government to households where people are living on benefits or where there are disabilities.
Richard Thomson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Secretary of State aware of the report published this morning by the Trussell Trust, which found that 55% of people receiving universal credit in Wales ran out of food last month and couldn't afford more, that nearly 40,000 people claiming universal credit in Wales have needed to use a food bank in the last month, and that 4 in 10 on universal credit in Wales have fallen into debt because they couldn't keep up with their bills? So whatever the UK Government is doing, it's clearly nowhere near enough. What's the Secretary of State going to do about it?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the focus of this UK Government is to ensure that people are able to work and not to have to live on benefits. But at the same time, the UK Government also recognises that there are those in need, which is why we've made sure that pensions, that benefits and the living wage have all gone up in line with inflation, which is why we made sure that there have been extra additional payments to pensioners, to those living on benefits or to households where there has been disability. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, people on low wages are not going to be helped by the plans of the honourable gentleman's government in Scotland, or indeed the Labour opposition, to shut down the oil and gas industry, which would throw 100,000 people out of work.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the Welsh Government's sustainable farming scheme, if implemented, would have the most serious impact not only upon Welsh farming businesses, but also on the cost of living in the rural areas that depend upon them? And does he further agree that for those communities, the scheme is in fact the very opposite of sustainable?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely correct. The Welsh Labour Government's sustainable farming scheme involves taking 20% of prime Welsh agricultural land out of commission in order to pursue a whole load of nebulous schemes. Mr. Speaker, is going to add to food miles and reduce our ability to feed ourselves.
Crosbie.
Mr. Speaker, one of the best ways we can support people with the cost of living across Wales is by supporting businesses. Does the Minister agree with me that the Welsh Labour Government, propped up by Plaid Cymru, should do more to support hard-working farmers on Anglesey, like Richard Jones and his family dairy, Maylog Jerseys in Llanfaelog?
Mr. Speaker, I completely agree with the Honourable Lady. The Welsh Government should abandon their so-called sustainable farming scheme, which is going to remove 20% of prime Welsh agricultural land and prevent farmers from growing food or grazing crops on it. And they need to do something about TB, which is running rampant in Wales, unlike in England. And they need to look at the NVZ across the whole of Wales, which is also going to impact on farmers like her constituents.
Shadow Secretary of State Jo Stevens.
Mr Speaker, thank you. The impact of the Conservatives' cost of living crisis on people in North Wales has been exacerbated by their dither and delay on new nuclear at Wilver. The previous project that ministers abandoned in 2019 could now be 50% completed, creating up to 8,500 jobs, and 900 permanent jobs would also be well on the way, adding a total of almost £400 million a year to the local economy in wages. What does he say to people across North Wales who are still looking for good jobs because of his government's failures?
Well, Mr Speaker, the last Labour government certainly didn't build any nuclear power stations. The UK Conservative government is getting on with Hinkley at the moment. We're sorting out SMRs. There is a process going on at the moment that will take the 6 companies with an SMR model, reduce that to 2, and then select one by the end of the year. And the £160 million in order to buy the Wilver site is going to ensure that there is a nuclear industry in Wales as a result of the policies of this Conservative government.
Jo Stevens.
Well, Mr Speaker, what a stark admission of his government's failure, that he boasts after 14 years in government and 5 years after doing absolutely nothing of acquiring a site on Wilver. The fact is his government's inaction has cost people money and still is, because in 9 years all but one of our current reactors will be offline, weakening our energy mix, risking higher prices, and again leaving us vulnerable to energy tyrants like Putin. So, will he make the commitment today explicitly to back new nuclear in places like Wilver, as Labour has done, to unlock jobs, investment and cheaper bills that his party has ignored for so long? Or is this another never-ending Tory fiasco like HS2?
Mr Speaker, the last Labour government weren't in the least bit supportive of nuclear, but what this Conservative government have done for energy, Mr Speaker, is to increase up to 50% the amount of electricity that is coming from renewables. We are the first advanced economy, Mr Speaker, to halve our CO2 emissions. We are pushing forward with floating offshore wind. We are pushing forward, Mr Speaker, with SMRs. And all we get from the Welsh Labour government for business is a block on new roads being built, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and legislation to charge people for driving to work.
Stephen Crapp.
Number 2, please, sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the UK government are backing our small businesses by raising the VAT threshold, delivering tax relief for the creative industries and investing in high-growth industries such as advanced manufacturing. This is in stark contrast to the Welsh Labour government's anti-business agenda, with Wales having some of the highest business rates in the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm interested that the Honourable Lady opposite thinks that having the highest business rates in the United Kingdom is funny.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Sadly, pubs and restaurants in Wales are closing at a faster rate than in any other part of the UK. While the measures in the budget which the Secretary of State mentioned will bring some relief, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the thing that is pushing many of these businesses to the wall right now is Welsh Labour's slashing of business rate support?
Mr Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is absolutely correct. The UK government have made sure that pubs and other small hospitality businesses receive a 75% discount on their business rates. In Wales, that has been absolutely slashed, meaning that pubs and small businesses are paying thousands of pounds more as a result of being located under the remit of a Welsh Labour government. And that, Mr Speaker, is an absolute disgrace.
Christopher Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I return the Secretary of State to the issue of the Rhondda Tunnel? Because the Chancellor of the Exchequer doled out bits and pieces of money to various members of Parliament constituencies on the Tory at-risk register, but didn't allocate any money to the Rhondda Tunnel, despite the fact that the Secretary of State told me personally in the Chamber that we should be applying for money under the Levelling Up Fund. But that's all gone, hasn't it? So where should we apply for money now for the Rhondda Tunnel?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there have been 3 rounds of levelling up fund, and the honourable gentleman should know, Mr. Speaker, that there are growth deals across the length and breadth of Wales covering every single constituency, and that there were special projects being backed in areas like Newport. There is a investment zone in a free port in Port Talbot. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that constituencies the length and breadth of Wales have benefited from the many projects which this government has put forward. But I appreciate the honourable gentleman's concern for that project in his own constituency and suggest he might try and look at shared prosperity fund money in future.
Alan Carnes.
My right honourable friend is well aware that the Chancellor has extended business rate relief at a rate of 75% here in England. But of course the Welsh Government are refusing to pass that money on to small businesses in Barry and in Cowbridge. Does he think it's completely unfair that a business in Bristol or in Cornwall will pay a lot less business rates than a business in Barry or in Cowbridge in my constituency?
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct. It is extraordinary that the Welsh Labour Government, who received this funding in order to support small businesses within Wales, are failing to pass that funding on. And as a result of that, the average pub in Wales is going to be paying more than £2,000 extra in business rates than a pub in England. The Welsh Labour Government must do more to support small businesses in Wales.
Chris Evans.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State will know that much of monetary policy is in Threadneedle Street, which shall have an effect on interest rates on Welsh businesses and Welsh households. Has he met recently with the Governor of the Bank of England? If not, would he invite him to Wales to see the impact of his policies on the Welsh economy? And may I humbly suggest that he holds that meeting with other Welsh MPs in Blackwood, Newbridge or Risker in my constituency?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman will surely be aware that the Bank of England set interest rates independently, and that's as a result of a policy that was brought in by the former Labour government. And it's been widely accepted that it's right that Bank of England sets the interest rates not as a result of what politicians are asking them to do, but as a result of what the economy demands. And as a result of the policies that have been pursued by this UK government in conjunction with the Bank of England, the level of inflation has dropped drastically from over 11% to 4%, and I would like to think that interest rates will soon follow.
Shadow Minister Jessica Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. This budget will do nothing to deliver a better future for retailers and customers. That's the words of the British Retail Consortium, whose members face 45,000 incidents of theft and 1,300 incidents of violence and abuse every day. To help keep our Welsh high streets safe, we on this side of the House want to fund an extra 13,000 police officers and PCSOs and extra measures to deter offenders. Why is it that this government is failing to tackle the epidemic of shoplifting and support its victims and take it seriously?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable lady is actually right to raise this very important issue for retailers. Can I just remind her, though, that the UK government have provided for an extra 20,000 police officers across the whole of the United Kingdom, and we have repeatedly brought forward legislation which will increase prison sentences and increase punishments of offenders, and very often that legislation has been voted against by members of the honourable lady's political party.
Sybil Roberts.
His government pledged £1 billion to electrify the North Wales main line, and we all know that £1 billion is an uncosted number pulled out of the air. We also now know that Phase 1 goes no further than Llandudno. How can he explain to the people living in Ynys and Gwynedd that talk of rail electrification just means more of the same for us? Slow trains, cancelled services and empty election promises.
Mr. Speaker, the UK government have already shown a commitment to transport in Wales, spending £390 million on improved rail infrastructure over the last control period. In addition to that has been the South Wales Metro, which is part of a UK government-Welsh government joint-funded growth deal. The Prime Minister was very, very clear about our commitment to the electrification of the North Wales rail line, and that commitment stands, Mr. Speaker.
Lisa Roberts.
The Tory leader in the Senate opposes moves to tackle the effects of excessive holiday homes in our communities. He goes on about, and I quote, anti-tourism and anti-English policies being imposed on the Welsh tourism industry. Now that the Tory Westminster government is abolishing tax breaks for holiday lets, will he claim that his Chancellor is anti-tourism?
Mr. Speaker, I would not, but my friend in the Senate has spoken out repeatedly about Welsh Labour government's plans for an overnight tourism tax, which is going to have a detrimental impact on tourism businesses across Wales. The Honourable Lady's party are in partnership with the Welsh Labour government, and if she really wants to support the Welsh tourism industry, I suggest she tells them that her members will vote against Welsh Labour's budget and prevent that tax from coming in.
Jonathan Edwards.
Number 3, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the Government is committed to transforming our electricity network to reach energy security and net zero ambitions. We recently announced an ambitious electricity network package which will reduce consumer bills, bring forward £90 billion of investment over the next 10 years and allow us to harness Wales's renewable resources such as floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea.
Edwards.
Mr Speaker. Pylon development for electricity transmission and distribution purposes are very controversial in the communities expected to host them. I have 4 such potential developments. In my constituency, the whole of Carmarthenshire is in uproar. Will he ask the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero to commission a study into existing technologies such as cable ploughing, which allow undergrounding at comparable cost to pylons?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, I do understand the concerns that have been raised in the Honourable Gentleman's constituency, and I appreciate he's discussed this with me previously and he is championing his constituents' concerns. I have to tell him that the information I've been given is that laying cables underground would cost £5 to £7 more, but I hear what he's saying, and if he has a presentation or something that he could forward to me, I should be absolutely delighted to make sure that DESNZ officials can see that.
Sir Michael Fabricant.
Subject of transmission and distribution policy, is my right honourable friend aware that the Senedd has now decided to ban GB News? What's his policy on that?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, there may be a small saving in electricity by doing that. But I think it's very disappointing that the Welsh Labour government are preventing a perfectly legitimate viewpoint from being heard by members of the Senedd, who would do well to listen to people who don't always agree with everything they say.
Gerard Mayo.
Number 6, sir.
Secretary of State, I appreciate.
Mr Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, healthcare is devolved to the Welsh Government, who have received record levels of funding to deliver on their devolved responsibilities, receiving 20% more funding per person than is received for comparable services in England. And despite this extra money, over 24,000 patients in Wales have been waiting more than 2 years for treatment. The number of people waiting more than 2 years for treatment in England, with roughly 20 times the population, is around about 200.
Mr Speaker, last month in Labour's Wales, fewer than half of red calls were answered by the ambulance service within the necessary 8 minutes. Now, this is the Leader of the Opposition's blueprint for government. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that instead of campaigning for more politicians in Wales, Labour should be focusing on delivering the health services that the people of Wales thoroughly deserve?
Mr Speaker, I completely agree with my honourable friend. I had to call an ambulance, a 999 call for my father-in-law at 11 o'clock one morning. It arrived at 4 o'clock the following morning. My father-in-law then had to wait for another 6 hours outside an AE unit in the back of an ambulance, where the Welsh Labour government in the ambulance base had actually built industrial fans to waft away the diesel fumes. Mr Speaker, this is totally unacceptable. They are cutting the NHS budget in Wales by around £65 million, and yet they can find £120 million extra for more politicians in Cardiff Bay.
Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Health Minister for England announced £200 million extra spending for dentistry. I asked her repeatedly, was this within the English budget, or was it additional, where it would produce a ban as consequential? All she could answer was that it was additional. Repeatedly she said that. Now, can the Secretary of State tell me, does the £200 million extra for dentistry in England produce about £10 million extra for Wales, or does it produce nothing at all? Or perhaps he doesn't know either.
Seriously? Well, Mr Speaker, as a result of the budget, around £170 million extra will be going to Wales. The honourable gentleman knows that Wales receives around 20% extra to deliver healthcare, and it is therefore absolutely appalling that the Welsh Labour government are unable to deliver the same services that are supplied in England. And isn't it interesting, Mr Speaker? We're talking about the National Health Service, Labour claim to be the party of the NHS, and where are they, Mr Speaker? They're not standing up for a supplementary on this question because they're absolutely ashamed of the level of healthcare that they've delivered in Wales. Let this not become a blueprint for the rest of the United Kingdom.
Mr Speaker, a 90-year-old constituent of mine waited 31 hours in the back of an ambulance outside the Wrexham Mile Hospital waiting to be seen. Betsy Cadwallader Health Board, which serves North Wales, is responsible for 80% of the preventable deaths in Wales. Would the Minister agree with me that the Welsh Labour Government who run the NHS is putting lives at risk?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise concerns about the level of healthcare being provided to her constituents in South Wales. And what is really shocking, Mr Speaker, is that when the independent commissioners at the Betsy Cadwallader Health Board raised serious concerns about over £100 million of money being misspent, the Welsh Labour Health Minister called them in and sacked them. No wonder we're not getting the right level of healthcare in Wales, Mr Speaker.
The Minister, the Secretary of State, and other Tory MPs bring up a litany of health issues in Wales, but Barnett consequentials are due to a result of health spending in England and need in England. Has the UK government ever made any spending decisions on need in Wales, say in health, and then funded England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as a consequence of Welsh need? He might find that a strange question, because UK decisions are always made on England's need, and other people get money as a consequence, which is why the likes of Wales is never going to catch Ireland for as long as Wales is in the UK and not independent, isn't it?
Mr Speaker, in actual fact, the Holtham Review looked at what Welsh needs were and calculated that Wales needed an extra 15%. What the UK Conservative government did was then to provide Wales with an extra 20%. So the question still stands, Mr Speaker. Why is it that thousands of people in Wales have been waiting for more than 2 years for treatment when the Welsh Labour government have been given more money than they actually need to properly fund the health service in Wales?
Michael Longay.
Number 7, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the, I'm afraid, not very independent commission was set up by Welsh Labour ministers. It reports to Welsh Labour ministers, but it was paid for by Welsh taxpayers. And the report they came out with was entirely in line with all the predictions which I made. More constitutional navel-gazing, more calls for more powers, and nothing at all to address the problems that have been inflicted on Wales by the Welsh Labour government.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it is deeply concerning that a so-called independent commission described Welsh independence as viable, despite the fact that the vast majority of people in Wales support remaining part of the Union. Of course, there is a difference with something that might be viable and something that is best. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that independence for Wales would be hugely damaging to the Welsh economy and public services, and any further exploration of this idea must be immediately ruled out by the Labour Welsh Government?
Mr Speaker, I completely agree with the honourable gentleman. It's hugely concerning that the Welsh Labour Government were even willing to consider independence for Wales with this commission. What they should be doing, Mr Speaker, is to sort out the longest NHS waiting list in the United Kingdom. They should do something about the fact we have the lowest educational standards in the United Kingdom. We have in Wales some of the highest business rates in the United Kingdom, and as a result of the last bit of legislation, we have some of the slowest speed limits in the whole of the United Kingdom. It's time the Welsh Labour Government addressed the real priorities of the people in Wales with the powers they already have.
The Conservative Party never wanted devolution in Wales or Scotland in the first place, and that's why they don't want to see powers extended to either the Senate or the Scottish Parliament.
Mr Speaker, the reality is that I campaigned against the Senate in the first place, but I was perfectly happy to accept the results of the referendum, and I suggest that members of the SNP ought to similarly respect the results of independence referendums, whether it's independence from the United Kingdom or independence from the European Union.
Dr Luke Evans.
Number 8, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, the recent protests by farmers across the whole of Wales, including outside the Senate, show the huge anger about the proposals for the Welsh Labour Government's so-called sustainable farming scheme.
To Luke Evans.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One of the best ways we can support Welsh farmers is by choosing to buy British products. This is good for the environment, reducing food miles, and it's good for our food security by supporting our farmers. So would the Minister congratulate Morrison's, Aldi, Sainsbury's and now Ocado, who have all signed up to my campaign to have a Buy British button online so consumers can easily find British produce?
I completely agree with the honourable gentleman about buying British, although I might go one step further and suggest that we buy Welsh food wherever possible. But it's going to be a lot more difficult if Labour implement their plans to bury 10% of Welsh agricultural land under trees and to bury another 10% under ponds. Mr. Speaker, it will increase food miles, decrease food security and destroy prime agricultural land in Wales. And the Welsh Labour government need to think again.
Jim Shannon, final.
Mr. Speaker, the best way to support Welsh farmers and Northern Ireland farmers and Scottish farmers and English farmers is to buy British. Does the Minister agree that we should all work together across all this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to promote farming everywhere?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Let's encourage everyone to buy British and let's make sure that we use as much of our land as possible for growing food, not covering it in trees. And Mr. Speaker, it's particularly hypocritical for the Welsh Government to tell farmers they have to plant trees on their land when the Welsh Labour Government are responsible for thousands of acres of forest, are chopping down 850,000 tonnes of trees every year, and they're even putting some of them into the boiler which heats up the